Alright, so now we're going to talk about anaerobic respiration. So we're not using oxygen. This is known as the lactic acid pathway. There's a fork in the road I didn't draw earlier. You might have seen it in the kind of cut down diagram I showed in the first video, or you can look at that diagram. It's just in the additional resources. So you can look at that and you can see where this breaks off. So this is going to be used when our energy demand outpaces our oxygen supply, our O2 supply. So when our energy need outpaces our O2 supply. Now that could be because the environment around us is low on oxygen. You know, you're swimming underwater and you're holding your breath and you've run out of oxygen in your lungs and you need to get up and get more. Well, you can buy yourself a little time with the lactic acid pathway. But that's not like what divers are necessarily doing, like shell divers, things like that, people like that. Turns out they have really large spleens that hold a bunch of oxygen in their bloodstream, which is interesting. But so they have, who would have thought, right? Like, I don't really know what else the spleen does. You can tell me when you take A&P or don't, because you probably won't see me. I'll be hiding from you because I don't want to know what the spleen does. But that's an interesting thing. Like, it's a side effect. Like, I know the main function of the spleen is not to help you have oxygen underwater. I know that much. But it's interesting that it can do that. But we can also outpace our O2 supply because we just need more energy. So we have to exchange oxygen through our lungs. It has to go through the bloodstream. It has to be carried around by hemoglobin. All of that takes time. And we can do things like have a larger amount of red blood cells. Just ask any professional bicyclist from like 2000 about that. Or, like Lance Armstrong. Or, what else can we do for that? Your muscles can become more efficient in their usage of oxygen, things like that. And there is a natural variance in terms of what people can have naturally, in terms of red blood cell count. There was one of the first like major Olympic cross country skiers had like insane red blood cell counts, but it was just natural. Whereas people later on would use techniques like blood doping to get those counts up, risking their lives. If your blood gets too viscous, you have a higher risk of a heart attack. So, like there's serious risks being taken. Blood clotting, so you can occur more rapidly. So you can run the risk of blood clots in your body, which can lead to strokes and all sorts of other problems. So also you can go really fast on a man-powered bicycle through the countryside of France. I guess that makes it all worth it. Represent the postal service proud, But in general, we every single one of us has used our anaerobic respiration pathway at some time or another. This is like the fight or flight. This gets used. If you've ever done a sprint, you've outpaced your oxygen supply, and you go into the anaerobic processes. You get lactic acid buildup in muscles. That's why you get sore muscles. That means that you outpace your oxygen supply and your muscles' ability to do that work aerobically. And so if you work out more, you can increase the workload that you can do before you hit this level. But in general, anytime you're doing any sort of exercise, you're probably falling into this range at some point. If you don't have sore muscles, then you're in incredible shape, or either way, I don't know, you didn't push yourself hard enough to get here. Now, that said, a cross-country runner or a long-distance runner isn't going to want to be in the lactic acid pathway for 3 hours, or however long their race is, like a marathon racer, because you'll die. Like, that will kill you. Now, there's always the exception that proves the rule. There are people that have mutations where they just don't respond to lactic acid, causing muscles to cramp and short out and all that stuff. And so they can build up these incredible levels of lactic acid. They just have this amazing tolerance. And so just like, there's the people that work on their red blood cell counts, you can also work on your response to lactic acid. I don't know if you can or not, but there is a genetic variance to how you respond to it. So there is the occasional person that goes into endurance sports and does really well because they just can push themselves through the lactic acid pathway 4 hours on end. But that's not normal. I want to be clear about that. So in general, that'll kill you. I mean, it would kill me. And if it didn't kill me, I would definitely wish I had died for the next, I don't know, 7 to 10 days while I recovered. You know, like, and the other thing too is, that's why rubbing sore muscles helps. You get that lactic acid buildup, you can rub, and it helps get it in the bloodstream and gets it out of the way. So you can help lower lactic acid buildup through actual physical pressure. Like, you can actually help push it into the bloodstream. You can help mix it around. So you're essentially stirring within your body. So what we have is glycolysis occurs, just like before. Now, it would generate our pyruvate, and then it would go into formation of acetyl-CoA. But what happens is, if we don't have oxygen, everything backs up behind it. We can't do oxidative phosphorylation. There's not enough oxygen. So we can't do the citric acid cycle. So it just backs up, boom, 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 all the way to glycolysis, and then we're left holding the bag. We got all this pyruvate. What do? We turn it into lactate. Which is the conjugate acid of lactic, or conjugate base of lactic acid. So physiological pH, we make lactate. Now, to do this, keep in mind we've made 2 ATP, and we've made them on site, so that's great. Then we make this lactate, and to do that, we are going to end up using, potentially using NAD. We're going to at least get 2 H pluses out of it. Now, here's the thing. This is borrowed ATP. Because if we build up too much lactate, we're done. The cell dies. We're in trouble. So this has to go to the liver. And I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but like, if it's in your leg muscles, that's not your liver. So it has to travel through the bloodstream, and it's got to go from one area to an organ in another area. And so you have this situation where it's going to build faster than you can remove it. So there's a certain level that's tolerable. You pass that level, you're in trouble, right? I think everyone's comfortable with the idea that if you don't breathe long enough, you don't stay alive. Now, what that can mean, for me right now, is probably like, 45 seconds in a pool, and I'm probably being generous. Whereas those pearl divers or shell divers I mentioned earlier, they could be down there for like 15 minutes or something. I don't know. I don't know if it's that long. I don't know. But they dive really far. Definitely 5. I'm comfortable saying 5. It's probably like 10 or 15. Because they're giant spleens, those cheaters, as well as amazing lung capacity and efficient muscles, and they're the worst. Okay, so, but eventually if you don't breathe, you're out. You have to use aerobic respiration. This is not a long-term solution. This is a short-term solution, which means it can only be used to solve a short-term problem. Like, I need to get away from that lion. Okay, well, yeah, we'll burn energy. We're going to burn that glycogen, and we are going to make a whole bunch of ATP, as much as we can doing it, but we don't have enough oxygen to just carry on through to the citric acid cycle. So it plugs up here, and we make lactate, and we get that ATP, and it is fast. It is on site. It doesn't happen in the mitochondria and have to work its way out. It is in the cytosol, the part of the the loose part of the cytoplasm that's not in an organelle. So essentially the cytoplasm, but cytosol would be a more specific way of saying. So it's on site. It's like, I need energy here. Boom, it gets built there. Now it goes to liver, and guess what happens at the liver? We use 2 ATP and we turn it back into 2 pyruvate. So this ATP is actually borrowed in this process. So we have to spend that 2 ATP. So it is borrowed. It is fast. It is fast equity, but it is borrowed equity. And we can only borrow so much before the company folds. That's the story here. And so then we can go through aerobic respiration with it again if we have an oxygen supply. So what you're doing is you massage those sore muscles. You help get that lactate, that lactic acid, to the liver, and then you can metabolize it. but you were burning ATP in the liver. So you're getting ATP where you need it, and then you have to burn energy later to get it back to pyruvate. So you're only getting 2 ATP. So there's some drawbacks here. There's some pros and cons. So here's our our pros list. It's fast ATP. It doesn't need O2. Right? It's fast because it just happens in the cell. It doesn't happen in the mitochondria, so it doesn't have to make its way out of the mitochondria. So it's going to be much more rapid response to where it's needed. It doesn't need O2, which is a pro in a circumstance where you don't have O2. In general, hopefully it doesn't matter because you're now having a nice easy breathing and you're not worried about it. Now for the cons, it can only be used as a temporary solution. And you only get 2 ATP. Keep in mind, we took a glucose, we got 2 ATP out of it. Don't lose track of that, because if we go through aerobic respiration, we get 34. So we're leaving about 32 ATP on the table, because we get about 34. I know how to do math. We get about 34, so we leave about 32 on the table. And if we lean on it too long, we just die. But it buys us that time. Like if it was you run out of oxygen, you die immediately. That is much worse than having a little bit of wiggle room there. There's nothing wrong with having a little bit of space, a little bit of buffer. And so yeah, I mean that's pretty much it. That's the pros, that's the cons. So if you use it too long, you die. It's not very efficient in terms of ATP generation, and don't forget that these are really borrowed, because you're gonna have to spend 2 ATP at the liver to undo the process. So it just buys you time, and that's a good advantage to have. If there are situations where if you survive another 2 minutes, you can survive another 20 years or 30. But if you don't make it through those 2 minutes, you're done. And this is something that can really help with that. And so that is kind of an evolutionary advantage, to be able to have that option. You can't rely on it all the time, but you can rely on it for a short period of time. Because that would be, think about it. Like you can hold your breath and you don't die, right? You can run faster than you can run at a speed where you're burning your oxygen faster in your body than you can replace it. You're you'd say that you weren't, you're having too fast of a pace. You're going too fast for your lung capacity. When you're a long distance runner, you're supposed to pace yourself. You set a pace and you hold it. You outrun that pace, you get blown out. You run out of oxygen. Well, every single distance runner, I say they don't do that, but what happens when they go to get that finish line, when they see that finish line in sight? They run as fast as they can, and they just blow out the rest of their oxygen supply. They sprint at the end. I mean, the professionals do. Don't get me wrong. Like, if I was in a marathon and I just because I see the finish line doesn't mean I'm going to go any faster, if I even ever get within sight of it. But, maybe that last step, because I'm falling on my face, because I'm done, So yeah, this really breaks it down, and it's just a fork in the road. It's just that instead of going on the aerobic pathway and carrying through the citric acid cycle and everything, for some reason we can't. We ran out of oxygen, everything backed up to here. Well, we can keep the ATP for now on site, make lactate, and then get it to the liver and make pyruvate again, which is going to require oxygen to use. Alright, so that's the anaerobic respiration pathway. You can look at the respiration summary document on the additional resources. That's what I showed in the first video, and that will show these side by side. So you'll see the lactic acid pathway splits off, and we do have NAD and NADH involved in that as well, as you can see. But what's really important is I'm just tracking the ATP in here. So I guess all we have left to talk about is I will do one more screen capture video, last lecture video of the class. I will talk about oxidative phosphorylation, specifically the electron transport chain, and watch that, and then check out. Really, I'm pushing it. I know, like I keep pushing this video, but do watch it because there's a really cool protein at the end. I'll talk about it more in the next video. But yeah, so this is what we're going to talk about in terms of respiration, and now we'll just talk about that last step. It deserves its own video. Electron transport chain is pretty cool. We're going to give a very broad overview of it. You can really get into the nitty-gritty on this thing. But I want to give the mitochondria its due, give it its own video, and show what it does. So that's what we'll talk about next. And then we're done with the class. You just have that little, test to take at the end, that cumulative final. So, not much left. All right.